Good afternoon, and welcome to the Brand Storytelling live streams for May 13th, 2020. I'm Drew Parkhill. Thanks for being with us. The live streams stream every Wednesday afternoon, and our mission is to deliver the most timely and relevant information for our community of brands and their storytelling partners. These shows are designed for you, so please let us know how we can best serve the community by suggesting future topics and guests that would help you now as well as into the future. Just drop me a line. I'm Drew at BrandStorytelling.tv. I'd like to introduce our host for today's show, Haley Geffen. She's a 6-time Emmy Award winner, branded content specialist and live action director and filmmaker. She's also the co-founder of Co-Ed Studios based in Brooklyn, New York. Hey, Haley, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I just happened to be in the office because isn't everyone in their offices now? I actually live in the neighborhood, so I'm able to come here. And here's a little tour. This is Brooklyn, New York, everyone. I want to introduce the two people that I brought onto this conversation, and I want to also give you a little context for that. Kris Walter and Nick Dodet, if you guys can reveal yourselves behind doors 1 and 2 or 3 and 4, there they are. It's funny to see us reveal ourselves like this. Kris and I have a history, and Nick and I have a history, and I think it's great that the three of us can get together when we know one another, and hopefully this will be informative and somewhat entertaining as I appeal to an empty audience, where typically I like to have audience members in front of me to laugh at my jokes. So Nick and Kris, you are obligated to laugh at things I say, even if they're not funny.
Sounds like a plan.
And laugh now. Okay, so my relationship with the two of these guys is as follows, just so you have an idea of how we are connected to one another. Kris used to be my head of production at Bodega Studios in New York City. We were a bi-coastal company. We were primarily a production company, and we were kind of that all-in-one model. I was a roster director, an executive creative director, and Kris and I worked extremely closely together. And when people work really closely together, like we all do in this business, you really get to know one another. I see Kris has one of his moon men behind him. Prior to that, he spent a lot of time at MTV. Was that what it's called, the moon man?
I think so.
I'm very proud of that. Also, the phone is ringing in my office, which is so funny. This place isn't open. So I'll let Kris and Nick introduce where they are in this moment. I'll just give everyone a connection to us. I'm a live action director, and I met Nick 2 years ago in China. Nick is, I will say, he might correct me, I believe he is one of the largest production companies and production service companies in Asia. I just gave him that title. I don't know if it's true. I'm gonna go with it. I did a brand film with him. I worked very closely with him. We spent 6 months leading up to shoot a brand film that was very successful all over China and Southeast Asia. So we know each other very well. If anyone has ever worked on for an extended period of time under those scenarios, you get to know each other very well. But Kris and Nick they didn't know each other until this. They're both great human beings. I hope we learn a lot. And just to give you, I'll let them introduce themselves, and then we'll get to the meat, because I'll tell you, they can say who they are without me talking. Kris?
All right. So I'm Kris Walter. I'm the head of production, director of production and content development with PVH Corporation. PVH has a portfolio of brands here in the United States. I oversee production for our in-house agency, which oversees Izod, Venus, and Speedo, and a handful of licensed brands as well. We have a full service studio. Being the director of production is just a fancy way of saying I kind of do everything that has to do with capturing content for marketing or advertising, from directing and writing spots and social media content to I have a team of producers who oversee all of the product photography, lifestyle imagery, anything that's photographed, videotaped, recorded, my team does it. We have a studio as well. So I kind of, I've spent my career doing a lot of different things. This is kind of the perfect place for me to be because I get to flex a bunch of different muscles. But I think Haley brought me onto this particular live stream so that there was a brand embedded human being who could kind of speak to what brands are going through right now, along with a pretty good percentage, about 85 to 90% of PVH in North America right now. I'm furloughed for a temporary period of time. So I'm at home hanging out. But when we get back, we're all anxious to get back to shooting. So I think this is a great conversation. I think the really smart people and the people who are going to be successful post-COVID are people like Haley. We're already thinking about how do we social distance on set. So yeah,
nice.
I think it's going to be great to hear from Nick because he's
Nick
literally a time traveler.
Yeah.
Like he is 2 months into the future. He doesn't have the power to travel any further or less far away from that or travel into the past, but he is literally 2 months further down the road than we are here in the United States.
We didn't even rehearse that, and Kris just teed him up. And Nick is an understated fellow, and I don't know if he's again, but Nick, you are the future. And we all have, hopefully, we're rubbing our crystal balls right now. And we want to know, first, tell us about your background and your connection to the US and all over the world, essentially. And then we'll get into the meat.
So first of all, in the future, it's 5 a.m. in Shanghai on a Thursday morning. And that's why I'm not at the office. No, thanks, guys. My name is Nick. I'm one of the founding partners of P.I.G, and I'm running the Shanghai office. I've been in Shanghai for 15 years now. I was based in LA before that for 17 years, mostly in the film industry, feature film, music video, commercials, et cetera, et cetera. We produce any kind of content that needs to be produced and aired in any kind of media here, mostly in China, but also some in Thailand, in obviously Hong Kong, Taiwan, some in Japan as well, and basically wherever it will take us. So, what else? Where to start? I don't know. Hey, Haley, you drive it.
Yeah, of course. As a director, usually people have to tell us when to stop talking, and I'll just take cues because I know Kris is going to give me cues to stop talking, Haley. And also one quick thing, I just want to tell everyone that I know a lot of what Nick is going to say, and I'm going to tee him up to what, and Kris knows a little bit, to what we find to be the most valuable information. But if anyone, and I really want people to be able to ask their questions because this is your chance to really kind of dig into production and what it means right now and what people are spending and what they're doing. Nick will tell us all their budgets, but really what's changed. And another thing to remind you, I want to thank Nick, who he kind of mentioned it, but it's the future and it's 5 o'clock in the morning for him. So, and we are now a worldwide stream. So the first thing I want to do is production aside, I want to know what it's like in China right now.
It's full on production wise. We're shooting.
No, before production, I want to get. I'm like, listen, I want to know what it's like in China. We here in the U.S. are dying for a little bit of hope,
Right.
And it's just really interesting to hear that.
It's full on as well. Every shop is, I mean, at least in Shanghai, shops have reopened, shopping malls, offices. It's the only thing that is still hasn't reopened are movie theaters. Schools are reopening. Most of them already have fully opened, but there are a few grades, including my older daughter's grade, 6th grade, which will reopen on Monday. Pretty much nationwide, but going out today is going to feel like it did probably in December, just a bit warmer. And yeah, almost everyone is wearing masks, although less and less. But as of a week ago, they've actually relaxed a little bit the rules on wearing masks in public places. but all restaurants, bars, nightclubs, everything has reopened here. I mean, those who survived the lockdown, that is, and we probably lost a good 30 to 40% of restaurants and bars and clubs in the process.
Wow. Okay. Fascinating. So before we get into the production details, I just want all of us to kind of have the understanding that we all know that politically the US and China have a different way of running things, a little bit different. And so we're all going to kind of forgive in the moment and try and find some commonalities. Nick will provide some of those differences, knowing that their country is able to trace COVID cases and our country really isn't. And I think that it allows production to run a little bit better and more efficiently. So if we can kind of accept that for the moment, for the purpose of this conversation, and then really kind of talk about the main differences, knowing that we won't be able to control things the same way that Nick can in China. So Nick, can you just start out by elaborating on what I mean and what it meant and the date that you guys started shooting and what that process was like?
Right. So they reopened shoots slowly, but in early March, which was essentially about 5 weeks after the original lockdown in Wuhan. But pretty much all of China was shut down throughout February. And one of the big thing that developed in February, which cannot unfortunately be developed, or maybe fortunately, in the Western world, is they have a what they call a health app application. So every person in China has to download a specific app which assigns a color code to your quote unquote health status. Green means that you're basically clear to go everywhere, in restaurants, in you know, to the office, etc., and to access sets. Yellow meaning that you should be quarantined because you have been in contact with someone who tested positive. And red means that you should be in a hospital, basically, because you have a full-blown COVID-19. How they assess these colors, basically, the app is tied to, number one, my ID, which is my passport, and number two, my phone number, meaning that basically I'm being tracked wherever I go. And if at any point I come in contact with someone who tests positive in the following days, then the health authorities will come to me, will contact me, and will ask me to quarantine myself. In the meantime, until they actually get a hold of me, my app will turn yellow and I won't be able to enter pretty much any public places, including sets. So when we enter a set, whether it's a studio or a public set, which we usually cordon off with police tape to make sure that we don't mix with the general public, temperature is taken several times a day, but every time you enter and leave the set, your temperature is taken. You have to wear a mask and you have to show that you have the right color app, which again, in theory, can change at any minute, depending on who you've been in contact with. That's the main difference that really allowed the authorities to track down anybody who was potentially affected, to isolate them, which enabled them in the span of 5 or 6 weeks to basically reopen the country as a whole. The second thing that we have going on for us right now, which pretty much no one else in the world does, is China as a country of 1.4 billion people is down to single digits infections on a daily basis. I think yesterday was 7, a couple of days ago it was like 1 or 2. Now, obviously not everyone has been tested, but I saw that there were 4 infections a couple of days ago in Wuhan, and now they announced they're going to test the whole population of Wuhan in the next 10 days, which are 11 million people, to make sure that that they have everything under control. So when we reopen, I think the government really felt that the first wave, at least, was under control, which means that today, when I go on a set, I'm more likely to come across someone who had food poisoning than someone who's actually positive at COVID-19. So it's literally business as usual, the way it was a year ago.
fascinating. We seem to be moving slower here. Talk to me about the first set that you went on. From the moment, I know you just stated you take their temperature, the size of the set, the size of the crew, the size of the room, things like ventilation and logistical things that, and fear. Was there fear?
In the early days, yes. I mean, by the time they reopened, I think things were okay in terms of the perception of others. Obviously, in the middle of February, whenever you would cross someone in the street, when you were allowed to actually be outside, which was another story, there was that feeling of wondering whether that person was carrying a silent killer on them. By the time they reopened, I think people kind of got over it. But at first, they reopened studios, and studios still to date have to be disinfected every morning before the crew shows up and every evening after the crew has left. And that's the studio's responsibility to do that. Again, there are people assigned for quote unquote health security. So nobody gets in unless they have the right color app. Nobody gets in until the temperature is taken. If the temperature is high, they're not getting in, and they're getting reported to the health authorities. And we have one person on set with us that's in charge of that. Everybody wears masks. In terms of distances between people, social distance, we never had that in China, because when they shut down the country, there was no social at all. Everything was shut down. Gas station was shut down, buses, obviously restaurants, but even grocery stores. We could only get food by ordering it, and it was delivered on the sidewalk outside of our buildings, and we had to go out and pick it up, even if it was snowing. Everything is paid through apps here. We don't really use cash, so there were no interaction with anyone. And now that we're back, whether it's at work or in or on sets, there is no such thing really as a social distance. And I think the thinking behind it is that in itself, it helps in the context of also wearing masks and not going to the office and et cetera, et cetera. But once you reopen, if you're on a set, number one, you cannot really be efficient if everybody has to stay 6 feet apart. Number two, a grip is going to touch a C-stand that another grip is going to touch 2 minutes later, and so forth. So they probably felt that it wasn't really worth the hassle. But once again, we're down to single digits. So the likelihood that, I was reading, I think the last case we had in Shanghai of someone testing positive was over 2 months ago. So it's a notion that the Chinese do not know. So social distance doesn't exist and doesn't exist on set. So it's I see it more and more appearing in the West. I don't know how it's being enforced and how it's actually efficient. So I can't really say whether it's a good thing or not, but we never had that here.
Okay, I'm gonna do a couple more production questions, and then we'll get into the brands, because I know a lot of people here have a lot of questions about how brands were affected, budgets, blah, blah, blah. The funny thing about here is so many funny things about the US right now. Ha, 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 ha. So we make these, like, my company, Coed, we made this really detailed document about coming back to production. And we made this like pretty little picture that you guys saw maybe for some promotion for this very stream, where we put people 6 feet apart. But we all know, I think everyone knows here, and everyone who's been on set knows that that's more for optics, right? So I guess this is the question, you know, for all of us to kind of use our own level of intelligence and our own risk factors that we take. But Nick, you know, are you finding that people are being smart and different than they were before they started, as far as hygienically and cleaning? Or are people just like pretending like it didn't happen? Because we tend on sets, age is younger skewed, and people have different opinions about how to treat this. So talk to me about the behaviors of people on set.
I think people have short memories. There's quite a bit of reminding that has to happen on sets in terms of washing hands. I mean, we have hand sanitizers everywhere, and we keep encouraging crews to do it. I mean, obviously, the minute someone starts screaming on set, we need that prop here on set right away. Then all of a sudden,
right,
people start running around, and
Yeah.
Right. So it's it takes quite a bit of reminding. I do notice changes, but again, if someone is being screamed at because they're late bringing something from the truck, they're going to try to like burst through the temperature check. So you have to stop them, because again, every time you leave the set and you come back, you're going to the truck, you need to get your temperature check and show that you have the right color on the app, and it's a procedure we have to go through. But yeah, people tend to have a pretty short attention span. But overall, it's better. And I'd like to think that quite a bit of it is actually going to remain beyond the pandemic. Another thing that I think will carry over, we do a lot of remote shooting right now for foreign countries. But
that's my next. Let's talk about VTR and client dynamics and how that's
right. So so we do both servicing for foreign brands, but we also produce for local brands. What I see happening and really lasting beyond the pandemic with local producing is a marketing director most of the time doesn't have time to come on set. But now with remote video village, if we have a pack shot and important shots, then we just have to tell that person or the CCO of the agency who may not be able to travel 2,000 miles to go on a location shoot, is actually able to, from his office, to attend it. The good thing with this is it kind of unclutter the set a little bit, and obviously in the process you have less people exposed to other people. So I think some of these will last beyond. Myself, I find myself that when I wash my hands now, which is probably not as much as I should, and definitely not as much as I did about a month ago, but it lasts much longer. It used to be a formality of like 4 or 5 seconds. Now it's like, a good 20 seconds with soap and, front and back. And so some of the reflexes I think are going to remain, which is good. My fear is that in 3 or 4 years, and we'll remember we had a really hard time during the pandemic, but a lot of the stuff we'll have forgotten about.
We'll go back to being schlubs.
I think the biggest question that everybody wants to know is, what does craft service look like in a post-COVID world? I'm assuming there's no bowls of pretzels just sitting there.
So that's interesting, because on the first shoot that we did, and we specifically told craft service that everything is going to have to be like little prepackaged, handled with gloves, etc., and sealed. Of course, we show up on set and craft service has the regular big bowl of open food and etc.
I couldn't help it.
So that's where you need to keep reminding people, because they have a tendency to say yes, 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 but then when things get going, they tend to forget. And now another thing in terms of crews, I mean, crews in China tend to be bigger than Western crews. You have a lot of people that do things like, just sweeping the floor. And these people have always been fed through what Japanese would call bento boxes. So it's already pre-packaged, there's some rice, some meat, some this and that, and it literally arrives. Our companies that come and deliver this. The on-set catering, we only have it usually for the agency, the client, or foreign crews. So we already had all that in place, which was a good thing during the pandemic, because we kept going with these prepackaged meals that arrive from a company that basically does that on and on and on and on.
Yeah, I imagine that will happen here. We call it box lunches on sets. I think that's going to end up happening.
Exactly. And we also, another thing that we have in terms of quote unquote social gathering for lunch, the Chinese tend to take their lunch whenever they're hungry. Except for those right around camera. But the concept of saying, okay, now everybody breaks, all 80 or 100 people sit down at table and eat. Usually by the time the crew around camera breaks, there's about 70% of the crew that wasn't working on set that's already been fed. So you also don't have these big gathering of people at one time. You're still going to have clusters of people smoking cigarettes here and there, but that's another story.
Too many cigarettes in there. So just, and I'm sure everyone's wondering, and I do see some questions coming in, and we'll get to those. They are shooting fairly large sets. So like in our pretty little document with our pretty little pictures and our people 6 feet apart, we've also said 9, 10 people on set, which anyone in this world knows that's impossible. But what Nick is saying is they actually have 80, 100-person sets already, but they're finding different ways, just like this lunch, to separate large groups. Now, again, the US, we are not near this. At some point we will be, but again, he's the future. I want to just shift into the brand side. So I want to know from Kris, what's been the discussion? So we know that like a shit happened. We're in May now, like everyone panicked. I'm still panicking. We're in May. We know maybe there's an end in sight. New York and LA, interestingly, are kind of head to head with going to be going the longest with this. So what are you guys talking about internally? I know you just talked to your boss the other day about what are you projecting moving forward on sets, money spends, budgets. You don't have to give things that are relevant to us, insider stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the simple fact is it's going to be a decision made on a brand to brand basis. And what I mean by that is if you look at PVH, right, specifically a clothing corporation where, the majority of our sales are in retail, right? Most of the retail stores in the United States are shut down right now. Some of our stores in Texas just opened, but we have a cash flow problem. So as soon as you have a cash flow problem where money's not coming in, you're going to clamp down on advertising, because if people can't get to Kohl's to buy a shirt, doesn't matter how many ads you serve them, they're not going to Kohl's to buy a shirt because Kohl's isn't open. So, those companies, you're going to see them very, very slow to come back in terms of shooting, in terms of media buying, in terms of all the rest. Obviously, nobody's getting on a plane right now. So I don't know about you guys. I've seen a massive reduction in the number of ads I'm served for airlines, for Amtrak. I used to get served those all the time. But then it's like I see ads nonstop for sweatpants, for beds, mattresses, like 1-800 mattress, whatever. I feel like I see that 100 times a day because people are home, and those things that they can use right now in this sort of quarantined world, there's a reason to advertise because people have the money and they can still get a mattress delivered to them.
Amazon, US Postal Service, anything that is relevant. Yep.
Exactly. So those companies, I would imagine right now, are trying to figure out how and more appropriately where to shoot. So if you're looking at, okay, we had a national campaign shoot scheduled for June or July. It was a big production. We still want to fulfill that promise. They're probably looking at places in the world that are a little quieter. Australia, South Korea, China, places that have opened up and have
New Zealand, apparently.
What's that?
New Zealand.
Yeah, New Zealand did a really good job of containing it as well. I think that they're going to be looking at those places. But to your point, it's also a question of how many people go in from the United States. The agency's not getting on a plane. You're not putting 20, 25 people on a plane. And if you're putting a director on a plane, they're probably going there and they're quarantining for 2 weeks before the shoot. I mean, let's be realistic. That's what it's going to take to get production up and rolling. But there's opportunity in all of that too. If you think about it, there's going to be savings in terms of travel, in terms of locations that you're shooting being a little bit cheaper. There's going to be opportunity in terms of media buying. If you think about that, I personally think, obviously apparel's hit hard. J. Crew filed for Chapter 11, Neiman Marcus. Other industries, I imagine, I haven't read a ton about it, but I imagine the car industry is probably hurting right now. Those companies clamped down on their advertising spends. So there's blood in the water. You're talking about the NBCs, the ABCs, the big numbers, TV advertisers are not selling as much advertising. So they're reducing the dollars. You can get a 30-second spot, I imagine, for probably half the price you could 2 months ago.
There's probably some of our attendees right now who could answer that question.
Probably.
Some of our network friends are with us. But anyways, yes.
So, I mean, that's the sort of look, this is primarily a video discussion. So that's my point of view in marketing video. And I think we're, you know, speaking from PVH's standpoint, as soon as there is a cash flow, they're going to want to pile on. We saw a pretty big spike in the last 2 months in our online presence. Our e-com is doing really, really well comparative to where it was 3 months ago. It's not enough to solve our cash flow problem, but once the retailers open up, we're going to have an opportunity to sell more on e-com, and we're going to want to produce into that. In terms of photography, product photography, it's ongoing. That's what you need to sell e-com. You need images of the product that you're selling. So myself and my entire team have been furloughed. So there's literally no production going on at all. The way that it's happening is literally like the product is being shipped from the distribution center directly to a photographer who's shooting laydown photography in their apartment.
You should just keep it in China and let Nick shoot it. I don't know.
That's what but that's the way. It's like, people look, I think, there's been a lot of like, okay, I was watching TV last night. It's probably the first time I put on network TV in a while, and I really wanted to see what kind of spots were airing. And I think we've gotten over the hump of that, like, we're all in this together kind of aspirational like commercials that we were seeing like a month ago. And now we're into this place where everything looks like, SNL from home, where it's like a Zoom video commercial. I think the next sort of phase is going to be more aspirational, right? Like people are cramped and have been inside for 2 months, 3 months. I want to get the fuck out. And I think brands are going to want to start shooting on a beach, not because people can go to the beach, but because that's how you're going to want to sell to them.
We don't want to see this pandemic universe in front of like all the time. We're in it, we live it. Most of us live in this, this beautiful cities filled with COVID particles. And we don't really, I agree. I think we're tired of seeing the commercials. I don't want to be a director from home. I'm ready to get out there. I'm ready to travel. And so I want to just quickly transition to Nick off of Kris. I am going to ask, I want to answer Mark Patterson has a really good question about.
He says Sandals is still running ads. That's hilarious.
That's funny. It is funny. I want, again, China again has a different approach to how they view the world during a pandemic. But I want to know from Nick, and I know the answer, and it's really fascinating. Have the brands changed their creative to adjust to this, like we're all depressed and like we're sad?
No, the only thing that when China was under lockdown pretty much in February, brands went to shoot abroad, mostly in Thailand, but they were still shooting the same kind of content. The only locally produced content was usually for like Chinese government TV. And the content was like, wear your mask, don't go out, don't do this, etc. That was it. We never had a phase where brands were like, we're all in this together, or, let's stick it out and we're going to get stronger. No, they were still like, hey, buy McDonald's, buy Coke. And when it reopened, it literally was the same type of content that we had before the lockdown. And what we're discussing the other day too is the Chinese have a very straightforward relationship with money. Money is good. So make money, sell things, buy things, do it. Don't be ashamed of it. My job is to sell you this. I'm going to do it. And I like your product. I'm going to buy it. So right now, in terms of content, I haven't noticed any shift in terms of the locally produced content. Budgets, we haven't really felt much of a pinch yet, but I'm also aware that number one, we're running on budgets that were signed off last year before the pandemic. And that's probably we're gonna start feeling it probably towards the end of the year and obviously next year. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens to all that Olympics advertising money that wasn't spent yet, and whether they're gonna say, well, do we wait until next year or do we spend it now?
I would like to volunteer for anyone in our audience. If you have any Olympics money to spend, I've done many, many Olympics. That's my only self pitch right here.
It's your middle name, yeah.
It is. I've done many Olympics commercials. I do want to get to this a couple things, and I think it's really interesting because I'm going through it right now. Mark Patterson asks, our production's looking to move to from quarantine cities like Los Angeles and New York to corona-friendly cities such as Atlanta. He didn't say that, but I'm saying it. We're currently bidding for a job. I'm in New York. I usually travel like 75% of the time for my jobs, anywhere, everywhere. I've traveled with both of these gentlemen all over the world. We want people to be able to shoot. I am not going to be precious with New York City or Los Angeles. I really made a big push to shoot that in Atlanta, and we all have production resources all over the place. And as much as it pains me that Atlanta is bowling and getting tattoos, thanks. I want, if they can work safely, I have a super talented people there, and I feel really comfortable shoot dependent, being a director for this particular shoot in their ear. I'm also willing to rent an RV, which sounds very exciting, drive down to Atlanta and shoot. Of course, very protected. So I love the idea of safely, kind of using those cities. There aren't many other production hubs in the US. There are, I don't think it's worth personally, like, let's say Chicago opens up. That doesn't really buy us anything. I love Chicago. Everyone I shoot there, I love it. But it's not like an Atlanta or Los Angeles or New York City. Oh, I lost someone and they must be from Chicago. I love Chicago. I just want to put that out there. But I think that's a really good question. And I think that also is to Kris's point and Nick's point. Looking other places right now, I think is a wonderful thing. Toronto, that's a great thing, but I don't particularly know. Does anyone know Toronto's current status? Do you think Toronto is going to be safer than New York or LA?
The other thing is these places become less safe the more people travel to them. You know what I mean? So that's the thing I would put. I mean, I'm just going to go off on a soapbox tangent for 3 seconds.
I'll cut you off if you go too far, because we only have like 7 minutes left.
Totally. Give me 3 seconds. Like,
good to know, Raj.
We have to, as a community, say, listen, we're not traveling people to other cities until this thing is over.
That's smart. That's smart.
Until there's a prophylactic. Maybe a director, maybe one key personnel. But overall, if you fly, I know friends that are shooting in Atlanta right now, and they're all doing it really responsibly. A lot of the stuff that you're talking about in your document, video villages and remote casting, that kind of stuff is all going on right now, which is great. But the temptation is going to be real to say, I can get a $6,000 a day DP from LA for $2,500 because he hasn't worked in 3 months, and fly him in and fly his keys in and fly, don't do it. That's how we're going to end up bursting the slight flattening of the curve that we've managed to see in New York City.
I think that's really smart. And this is Kris. Kris is really good at knocking down budgets. So he's already thought of that idea, and then he could talk to himself out of it. He's like, I'm going to get these people for less. They want to work. But then he talked himself out of it because he said the right thing to do is to be safe. So I appreciate that. I want to talk about locations really quick. So there's one thing. We've done a lot of research on ventilation, because ventilation in studio spaces like airplanes, that gets recycled. And we all saw that diagram around China and the restaurant. There's a couple stages that we've been talking to that are starting to set up for what will be within the next 3 to 4 weeks, that they will have those full filtration systems that the airplanes are now having, that will allow us to not continue to breathe in those continuously recycled air that allows us to get infected. So just to give you some tidbits, we've been doing a lot of research. We've been working with and talking to many sound stages across the country. Everyone's waiting for the stay-at-home orders, but everyone seems to be putting in place a brand new set of rules. So that is very informative. I hope everyone here receives that information. if you want more information on it, you guys can email me. Andrew can provide the email. And we're happy to share that information with you. Nick, are you finding that there are new ways of like ventilation? Are people going that far in China, or is this just people with time on their hands here?
Wow. I mean, I think the biggest issue with ventilation, and that's the one you referred to, the article in the New York Times about that restaurant in Wuhan, is things travel. So the famous 6 feet distance can become 15 feet if you blow air conditioning in the middle of summer. The best way to play it safe, and that goes back to what Kris just mentioned, is to make sure that you're in an environment where you're not likely to get COVID-19, period. The minute you start taking chances by either bringing people in from places where it's active, then you're going to have spikes again, regardless of what you do in terms of trying to prevent it and wearing a mask, etc. You got to beat that first wave so that people on set feel comfortable. When I go on set today, I literally feel that I'm more likely to catch any kind of disease other than COVID-19. And that way, I'm not worried about being on set. I'm not worried about calling in. We discussed it the other day. Do we have a backup crew in case someone turns yellow on the app when they arrive? No, we don't, because the likelihood that someone becomes yellow is as high as someone getting food poisoning. And we never had backup crews because of food poisoning before the pandemic. So the big thing is, and that's where I'm worried for the US, because you don't have a national policy in terms of where to shoot, where not to shoot, is that the minute that you reopen here, people will travel there to work. Or they'll travel to you if your place is open for business, and it's gonna keep being passed around. So I think that everything that everyone is doing right now, because they do have time on their hands, as you mentioned, I think it's great that we look into new ways to ventilate stages. They haven't really done that in China, to be honest. I don't think they will, but I think it's great it's being done, because it's going to carry over the pandemic, and it's going to be progress that will benefit from. Is it going to beat the virus? Is it going to create a safe work environment? No, it's going to create a safer one, but not a safe one.
Right.
The premises of the issue is still there. And if you look at it, the strain of virus that's hitting the West Coast is a different strain than the one that hit New York City. New York City came from Europe, and it was a lot more brutal than the one that hit Wuhan. And the one from Wuhan is the one that hit Washington State and LA, et cetera, et cetera. And it's less brutal also because, the stay-at-home orders there are maybe more efficient, I don't know. But as soon as people travel, whether it's from city to city, state to state, I mean, the virus doesn't care if they're in Nevada or California or wherever. It's like, the virus, it just wants to multiply. So you can create a safer work environment, but safe, no, the only way to make it safe is to beat that first wave and make sure the second wave doesn't happen.
So we need to be patient. We need to look to use safe cities, even if that's international. And Nick, also, if anyone wants to know anything about the VTR, we're happy to provide that. It's a very cool technology. It's actually a US technology that Nick has told us about. Q-Take?
Oh, Q-Take is one of them, but you've got a flurry of them right now.
Okay, so the other thing is, directors directing, you can still use your favorite directors. Nick and other countries across the world who are practicing, safe shoots and safe production are all available to us. I believe because New York and Los Angeles and Toronto and other production cities are all in the same boat, that we have to just continue to plan and be smart. And I would like maybe one last comment from Kris and one last comment from Nick that kind of gives a little bit of hope. I like ending on hope because this is our last minute. About moving forward. And I get hope. When I talk to Nick, I feel hope. So that's really kind of what I look for as an emotional being. Go guys, you get 30 seconds each.
Go ahead, Kris.
I would just say to anybody listening who is a founder, owner, head of production at a company, I think the thing to remember in the United States right now is that the companies that do this right, that come out of COVID right, look at the AICP just released guidelines around it. They're really stringent. I think they're recommendation more than anything, but it's talking like down to like makeup artists using like disposable implements and stuff like that. But the companies that do it the best, that own it, that resist the urge to say, okay, let's cut a few corners to win the job, those are the companies that are going to get through this. The companies that say, fuck it, as soon as the state is open, it's business as usual, are the ones that are going to be responsible for basically taking us right back to where we were 2 months ago. So be smart.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's a great opportunity to rethink the way we do business, to try to find new angles, safer ways to do it, more efficient ways to do it, cheaper, better ways, essentially. And I agree with you. I think those who are just waiting it out to come back to the business as usual are not going to survive. Or if they will, they won't survive the next wave. It's about being smart and finding new ways to conduct business and to take it from there.
And craft service will survive this. Don't worry, everyone.
Exactly.
There's plenty of prepackaged candy and pretzels and nuts for us in the future. And box
I look forward to the days that we can all work together in person again.
And we will.
Yeah. All right. I don't know if Andrew comes back on.
I'm here. I'm back. Thanks so much, you guys. Thank you, Nick and Kris and Haley, for hosting. I really appreciate it. I think that these 60 some odd people that were watching got a lot out of this, and I appreciate it so much. If you're just joining us, or if you missed a portion of this stream and you came in late, we will be publishing this on YouTube as of tomorrow. You can go to BrandStorytelling.tv/streams to stay up to date and register for future streams. Thanks so much, all of you. I really appreciate it. It was a pleasure working with you all on this. Be safe and be well.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.